All right, guys, what is happening? Happy Friday for those of you guys who are joining me live right now from wherever, right? I see you guys commenting, everyone's tuning in from different places, but thanks for spending some Friday time with me, getting better and diving into some of the tougher material inside the NASM curriculum. And you might be watching this elsewhere. Maybe you're watching the recording on YouTube. That's great. My promise for you guys is throughout the next, let's call it 50 minutes, 45, 50 minutes, I'm going to make sure that we go through everything I know that you need to know about chapters 5 and chapter 7 inside the NASM curriculum. And specifically, I wanted to do this webinar or this masterclass, you can call it, on chapters 5 and 7, because I can tell you guys I'm on no less than like 15 phone calls a week, right? And I've been doing this for years now, teaching the NASM curriculum since like 2011 and 12. And since that period of time, right, the number one place that people get caught up, especially by the time I'm talking with some of you guys on phone calls, and I know a lot of you guys are now our Axiom students, right? So we got you on the other side of it, which I love. But for many of you, even you guys, when I spoke to you, people get into chapter 5, chapter 7, and they're like, shit. Like I thought this was going to be like push-ups and squats. And all of a sudden it's like nervous system, Golgi tendon organ. Like it's way more terminology and way more physiology than most people are ready for. And, I'm okay with that, guys. I'm going to be honest with you. From teaching other organizations over the years, I like teaching the NASM curriculum because it's rigorous, because it is challenging. What that means to me is I know if we can get you to the other side, you're going to value what you've done even more. And no worries. Inside of here, I know some of you guys have gotten to probably see some of our videos before, some of you guys in the classroom with me, which I love. So this is going to solidify it, is I'm just going to try to narrow things down, right? Especially inside of chapters 5 and 7. These are like multiple semesters in college, right? I did my undergraduate, my graduate degree in biomechanics, exercise physiology, and these concepts, they're great. Like I love going into some of it. I really nerd out on this stuff, but you don't need to know the depth that some of you guys think. So that's, promise number one is I'm going to narrow your focus as we work our way through chapter 5 and 7. So, okay, Joe said, don't worry so much about this, right? Maybe it's not as important right now for the exam. And maybe as a new trainer, it's not as important, right? There's kind of twofold there. And then I'm going to try to just make sense and simplify some of the other stuff that's in there. So as we go along, guys, you guys can see I have some of the comments on the screen. I'm going to try to make sure that even if you have a question and I don't tackle it in the moment, I'm going to make sure we have some time at the end for a little Q&A. But I want to get you guys through this stuff because there really is a lot in chapters 5 and 7. And I know hopefully if we run through it, we talk through it practically, we give you some different ways to wrap your head around the material, you guys are going to be crushing it. All right. Because truthfully, chapters 5 and 7, guys, even though they're tough, they're not the biggest part of your exam. Like you can't be hung up on these chapters for a month or two. Sometimes I'll talk to people on the phone and they're like, Joe, yeah, I've been stuck on chapter 5 for like 4 weeks. And I'm like, you got to move on. You got to move on. Like it seems important and it is, right? I don't want to, it is, it absolutely is. If you want to be a great long-term trainer, it's all important, but you got to know, you got to make sure you're not majoring in the minors, spending too much time on some of that stuff. All right. So just something to keep in mind. One thing I want you guys to know, keep in mind as you guys signed up for this stuff, you guys signed up to become a personal trainer. You signed up probably because you want to help people. And so when the material gets tough, don't bitch and moan. Don't complain about it. First off, it's what you signed up for. We're going to get you through this. Okay. I promise. But people need you. Like there are thousands, there are millions of people out there. They need us. They need us in their lives. And like the data and the material, none of it's new. And a lot of it's actually old now, right? Some of the data on obesity, tobacco smoking, we know these things, but the world is hurting. The world is hurting and you guys are the answer. And we just need you to get to the other side. So, when it's challenging, keep this in mind. Okay. Keep it in mind, guys. We got to get you guys through this stuff. All right. So that being said, beyond that, right, the world is hurting. So don't give up. Don't give up in the process. Keep moving forward. Okay. I need you guys to keep that in mind because that alone, guys, just you finishing this process is going to be huge. It's going to be huge. You won't see some of these stats and this data, let's just say NASM. And again, I love the organization. We are a direct licensed partner. We're one of their top partners. We help so many people try to make the most out of this process, right? Let's say out of 80,000 people who might sign up for these certifications, there's a massive amount that never make it, right? Let's assume maybe 80% of 80,000 people sign up, maybe 30,000 make it to the exam. And that's just because they give up, especially in these chapters. So first off, not going to be you. We're moving forward. From that, very few pass. And then from that, to me, this is actually the important one, guys, is how we learn this stuff right now, how you're thinking about this material. It matters because even for those who make it to the other side, many people never stick with training. And I don't think it's anything wrong with the industry. A lot of people will say like you can't make great money, like it's hard to get started. Like, yeah, all those things are, but every industry is like that. I think it's because people don't approach this process with the right mindset on like, how do I learn this in a way where I can be a really good trainer, really good trainer. So that being said, we're going to try to do that today too. I don't need to do much of an introduction. I know many of you guys are, you guys have either been inside of a lot of our materials. We have so much free stuff out there. Some of you guys are in our classes right now. We got one of our virtual classrooms happening. We're in like week 7 right now, going into week 8. You guys are crushing it. But if anyone hasn't come across, and this is the first video you're watching somewhere, my name's Coach Joe Drake. I've been a trainer for coming up on 20 years, which is crazy to say now. I'm lucky. I found this stuff early. I found it early, and I was obsessed with it. And along the way, have been able to teach for the last, let's call it 12 years, taught through other organizations, and really the last like 10, 11 years, I can confidently say, probably the most experienced, maybe the most in-depth, probably the best person to teach the NASM curriculum specifically, as now I'm working internally with NASM. So I just say that to give you guys confidence. If I talk about stuff in this call today, pay attention to it. If I don't stress about it. Don't stress about it. But thankfully, we've built a great process. We've had, close to 2,000 students now go through the program, about a 94% pass rate on average. And a lot of that comes down to what we're going to do on this call live today. Narrow things down so you know what to focus on, give you more context so it sticks in your brain, and hopefully kind of present it in a way that you're going to be thinking about when you get into the gym. I think those things are they're pivotal. They're key. And then the reality is, guys, you guys being on here right now, you watching this video, this is how most of us learn. Most of us were not designed to learn this stuff just from a book. We need scenarios, conversation, explanation, and just someone to guide us. So I'm here for you guys. That's what I'm going to do for you guys. All right. And don't worry, I see some great questions on here already. I'm going to tackle some of this stuff later, but I'm going to keep us on track. So first off, I do like to point out, as you guys are going through this process and studying, especially if you're not one of my students and you haven't worked with us, we haven't talked about this, you got to make sure you're not majoring in the minors. So that being said, we know in the end, guys, I truly believe NASM wants you to pass. They lay out the importance of every area, and you just have to make sure you're putting out the right amount of time and effort. And so that being said, right now, we're going to talk about just chapters 5 and 7 because they are 2 challenging chapters that have a lot in them inside of section 3. Now, all of chapters 5 through 10, you're going to have 15 questions. So if we narrow that down to chapters 5 and 7, you might have a total of 5 questions that come from it. So I just say that to give you some frame of reference. As you get to later material, you're going to be tested much more heavily over that stuff. So that should tell us like, okay, NASM's not expecting me to go crazy deep on the electron transport chain, on sliding filament theory. I just need to know like basic understanding of some of these concepts. So that's how we kind of orient ourselves, is making sure as you are working on this stuff, am I spending the right amount of time? And if you're spending 3 weeks on chapter 5, the answer is no. That does not track with what we're seeing here. All right. So there's the exam blueprint. Let's actually, guys, let's jump in. Let's jump into some of these concepts because I know this stuff, some of it you've heard, some of it hearing it a second time with me, hopefully is going to click in a different way. And I'm just going to literally I'm going to go through some of these different concepts that I know, hey, when it comes to exam time and or exam/training clients, because I'm also concerned about that for you guys, you need to know this. You got to have a working understanding of it. And in many ways too, guys, you need to be thinking about this shit when you're in the gym. Pardon my language, but we're just being real here. You got to think about it while you're training yourself. That's how you're going to get to another place with this stuff. First one is understanding inside of chapter 5 and 7, you're going to see HMS, human movement system, right? This term really encapsulates the fact that our skeletal system, our muscular system, and our, hopefully you guys got it, nervous system, all 3 of these work together and they're intimately intertwined. right? And so some ways you can think about this skeletal system, if we have an abnormality in our skeletal system, or maybe even just, let's just talk about what we call anthropomorphics, like lever links. Someone's got really long legs, really long femurs relative to their body. Well, that's going to impact how we move. It's going to impact the muscular system. If you have, same thing, let's say you have a strained or a sprained muscle. Well, that's going to impact our nervous system. All three of these work together. That's the idea. Skeletal, muscular, and nervous system. And how they coordinate and work together controls how we move. That's kind of the simple takeaway. Another one you guys will see quite a bit, and I know we talk a lot about inside of our course, is the kinetic chain. All right. Kinetic chain. Forces, kinetic, chain, linked together. Right? Kinetic chain. So that's an important piece. And that one is, you guys can see even with our image on the screen here, this image is meant to kind of identify a little bit of what we call like stable, mobile joint areas of the body. Some of you guys may have seen me talk about this in other videos, but the idea that, hey, guess what? Feet are meant to be stable, right? They're meant to be a good platform. Ankles are meant to be relatively mobile. Knees stable, hips mobile, lumbar spine stable. We can work our way through the whole body in this alternating pattern. And the kinetic chain, what that means is that as we move around, as we exercise, as we interact with our environment, you're going to have forces translating up and down the body. And if we do lack, let's say we have a lack of ankle mobility, a lack of hip mobility, maybe a lack of thoracic spine mobility, all three very common, then it's going to alter how those forces move through the body. Right. So I know that's kind of a vague concept, but it ends up allowing us to, especially after the fact, sometimes even understand some of our own issues, our injuries, our aches, our pains, because a lot of it comes down to understanding where are we lacking mobility and movement and where are we lacking strength. And the kinetic chain, everything's working together. Everything's working together. And so in many ways, like this image here and this concept, this is kind of the foundation for the overhead squat assessment, right? The overhead squat assessment later in your material really is a kinetic chain assessment. It's putting you in this very rigid position where you do this overhead squat. And if you lack any of those things, if you lack ankle mobility, if you lack hip mobility, it's going to show up. That's the idea. Okay. So feel free. You guys can throw questions about that. But I think that kinetic chain concept, really some takeaways from that are everything is linked together. All right. And so love that. Love it. I'll tackle this one right now. We had a question. Arun said, would that also relate to the regional interdependence model concept? The answer is absolutely yes. So this is like very briefly touched on. And this is one where if you guys wanted to go deeper on this, you could Google this and find a lot of great stuff on the regional interdependence model. It's introduced in the material, but not talked about in depth. So it's not going to be tested over heavily. But just what this means is that everything's connected, right? Everything's connected. If I have something going on in this area, it's probably going to work its way up or down my kinetic chain. I'll give you one good example of this. This is one I've actually dealt with a fair amount. Let me go back to a little different view for you guys. I'm here in South Florida, a lot of golfers, a lot of tennis players, and I have a good handful, a couple of recreational tennis and pickleball, right? But even more so tennis, because tennis is more overhead. Some tennis players, and it's not uncommon. I've had a couple that have had some on and off like wrist pain and like hand issues. And, again, part of our job, guys, we're not physical therapists. We don't have to have all the answers. Like we're the ones who help people in the gym. However, understanding everything's connected can be helpful. And, again, specifically with one of my women, I've kind of always known like, hey, we've been trying to work on thoracic spine mobility and shoulder control, like shoulder blade stability. Because in our other exercises and our pushing, our pulling, other things, it kind of shows up that she's lacking there a little bit. Well, guess what, right? Over time, with someone who's an overhead athlete, the relationship of your thoracic spine, your shoulder blade, your glenohumeral joint, your elbow, your wrist, forces are moving up and down the chain, especially with overhead activities. And lo and behold, I finally got my girl working with a great physical therapist. And what are they working on? They're working on, even though she's having this wrist issue that's kind of worked its way there, they've, kind of addressed and assessed like, hey, I think it's actually coming from the thoracic spine and your shoulder blades. So that would be this idea of this regional interdependence is like, hey, our body's connected. Chasing pain is a funny thing. Sometimes we're having pain somewhere, but it's being caused by this whole other thing in our system. And, again, we don't have to have all the answers, but I like working with good physical therapists because I've learned a lot about that to better help my clients as well. Okay. So cool. That's probably our takeaway there. It's just understanding that like, hey, there's nothing wrong with training body parts, biceps, triceps, chest, back. But when you understand the human body, movement is more integrated than that. That's why oftentimes you'll see us talk about pushing, pulling, lunging, hinging, squatting, talking about the patterns. If you train the patterns, you'll also train the muscles. But sometimes when you only train the muscles, you're not addressing the movement pattern as a whole, right? So that's kind of beyond our exam stuff. But that's, to me, relating this stuff here inside of chapter 5. All right. So hopefully that's helpful for you guys. Next piece on here too. So that, again, that's a big concept that comes up in chapter 5 and 7, this human movement system, why it matters, general understanding. And then we start to get into chapter 5. We start to get a little deeper into the nervous system. And this is definitely an area I'm going to tell you guys, stay at the level I'm going to give you on this call, because it's easy to go a little bit too deep in this chapter, right? You start getting caught up in all the cranial nerves, and you get caught up in the axon and the dendrites and, like the anatomy of the neuron. Some of that stuff, again, it's valuable information, but it's not the most testable right now. And it's also not the most practical for you as a trainer, right? So I think some things for us to keep in mind, let me give you guys a little bigger view, are, guess what? The nervous system is governing a lot of stuff, right? It's not only governing our conscious movement, which we'll talk about, right? The somatic nervous system, but also like the things we don't think about, the autonomic nervous system, organs. The nervous system is our communication system throughout the body. And so again, we see here on the screen, specialized network of nerves that transmit information. And that information we're going to find is massive, crazy amounts of information we're taking in every single second. And our brain and our nervous system is processing, right? It's trying to figure out what it means. And then we're doing stuff about it. So the nervous system, very, very important. And this is also, I'll tell you guys, when you get on to the practical elements of training later on in the material, even more specifically, like phase 1, phase 2, stabilization kind of seems boring, but a lot of people don't think about the fact that the nervous system is learning when you're doing exercises, right? Exercises are skills, and the nervous system adapts. But a lot of people don't think about the nervous system. We think about calories, we think about muscles, we think about those things, and those are all valid, right? Those are obviously what we're targeting. But the nervous system, how we engage, right? How we create muscle contraction, how those nerves transmit signals, that process adapts. And so when we start thinking about starting someone into a training program with us, those should come into play. This should come into play. Okay. So in general, understanding nervous system is our communication pathway. And you guys can see on here too, right? I like this image. This is an image of what we call like an alpha motor neuron or a motor unit, right? This is an alpha motor neuron, this blue neuron that's going down, and all the muscle fibers that it innervates. And we have different size motor units throughout the body, all right, based on how fine-tuned control that we've got. But one thing to keep in mind here, you guys may have experienced this. If you can think back to when you first started working out, or even for me, I think about, strength training for football in high school. We had some kids, who would come in and they'd never lifted before. And they start to learn technique. All of a sudden, in like 8 weeks, their bench press went up like 50 pounds, 75 pounds. And it was like, what? That's crazy. These beginner gains, newbie gains, you might call it. But a lot of it's nervous system, right? And initially, if you look at this image, your brain, your nervous system is sending signals to tell these muscles to contract. But for a newer exerciser who's learning the movements and learning how to engage everything, not only are they maybe not getting their joints and their body in the best mechanical positions. So earlier on, they're not in they're not in advantageous positions. They get in better positions. They get stronger because we're engaging muscles better. But from a nervous system standpoint, your nervous system actually gets better at using all the muscle fibers you've got. So that's where people will get much stronger in the first 4 to 8 weeks if you do it the right way without having to overload a lot, right? There's not a lot of muscle gain happening, but the nervous system is definitely adapting. Okay. So nervous system, very important. You guys can throw questions in here about the nervous system as we go. I'm going to keep it rolling though. This is one where, you don't need to go crazy deep on all these things, crazy deep on all of them. But I do think it's nice to have this 30,000 foot view of like, all right, well, what's going on here? Like, how's everything fit together? So we got the nervous system. I love this image here. Just seek to understand the big picture. We've got our central nervous system and our peripheral, right? Central is brain and spinal cord. Peripheral, the rest of our body, the periphery. And then as you break that down even further, we have motor and we have sensory nerves. Sensory nerves, we're going to talk about a couple, especially like muscle spindles, Golgi tendon organs, but there are many, many sensory nerves. Our body's constantly gathering information about the internal environment in our body as well as the external environment. So we're gathering all that. And then there's the motor, which is more about contraction in the body. And then as you break down the motor, we have those two subdivisions, somatic and autonomic. Easiest way to remember that, ladies and gents, autonomic kind of sounds like automatic, right? Things you don't want to think about. You don't want to think about digestion. You don't want to think about redistribution of blood flow. These are things that are like just happening behind the scenes. Somatic is more conscious, like, hey, I wanted to think about snapping my finger. Those are muscles controlling that. Okay. And then underneath autonomic, sympathetic, parasympathetic. Man, I tell you what, this is one where I've actually really enjoyed diving back in. The sympathetic, parasympathetic, very complicated. Oftentimes they're seen as like in working in opposition, where you're either sympathetic, parasympathetic, but they work in combination with each other. And it's more, let's call it understanding when our body needs to mobilize fuel and when we need to conserve. And sympathetic is like fight or flight, right? I like to joke in our classes. It's like you're being chased by a bear. Boom, your body's going to adjust some stuff quick. Blood flow to working muscles, carbs are mobilized, heart rate increases, heart contractility, like all kinds of stuff happens quick. Parasympathetic, more rest and digest, more relaxation. Our body's conserving energy a little bit more. All right. So in general, I would say just seek to understand the big picture. Sorry there, of the nervous system. And I like this image because I think it keeps you at the right level without going crazy deep down any rabbit holes. But then beyond that, this is definitely, guys, hey, ding, 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 easy test question that comes up. I've taken the exam for NASM multiple times because I like to know how they're asking things. This one always comes up. And it's, what are the three functions of the nervous system? So we kind of talked about it's communication. It's a pathway. We're gathering info. We're doing things. All right. I like it. My man Adam said he's got the NASM exam coming up on Monday, baby. That's what we're talking about. You better crush it. You better come back on here and comment and let us know that this little webinar helped. But sensory, integrative, and motor. And this is one, once again, as a trainer for the last 19, going on 20 years, this is a simple concept, but man, it's really important. Sensory, we're gathering information. Okay. Like, this image here says the body feels thirsty. The eye see a glass of water. Good. We're gathering information. Cool. Awesome. Integrative, my brain's figuring out what to do with it. Integration, processing. And then motor, I have a response. I go to grab the glass and lift it up. So there's a simple one. But think about this, guys. Every time that you do an exercise, there's so much information the body's pulling in. There's the internal information, the muscle spindles, the Golgi tendon organs, what I'm seeing, what it feels like, what the coaching cues, all this stuff. It's all this information coming in. And then their little exerciser brain is like, what in the am I supposed to do with this? What do I mean? What corrections do I make? Am I in a good position? Right? All these things are happening subconsciously. You're not thinking about it. And then motor, what do I do? How do I move? How do I alter what I'm doing? So I just say this. First off, how do we apply that as a coach? Be simple. Give them fewer cues. They're processing a lot. The other thing, start with simple exercises, right? You got a new client coming in. Don't give them a reverse lunge to a curl to press the first time they come in. There's way too much shit going on in that exercise. There's no way you're going to get good lunge position and good curl position and good press. Each of those is its own movement. So those are just some easy takeaways from it. But this is also one of the reasons people will get stronger initially, because this whole process, this is like a constant feedback loop. Gathering information, figuring out what to do, execute. Gather information, figure out what to do, execute. So this is part of the learning process, when someone's starting to exercise. All right, cool. So that being said, we got that. Cool. We're talking big picture. What's going on? Sensory, integrative, and motor. Let's talk about a couple specific mechanisms. And these ones come up actually quite a bit. Once you guys work your way through the material, you're like, man, okay, I've seen muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs in quite a few places. And these are called Mechanoreceptors, because guess what? They are giving us mechanical information. So mechanoreceptor. Muscle spindles, we can see from this image, they really live in the muscle belly, the belly of the muscle. Think like the middle. And if you could imagine it, you could almost imagine this pen as a muscle fiber, and the muscle spindle is like a coil that's wrapped around it. And so when that muscle fiber, when it changes length, it's giving us information all day long. All right. And on the extreme example, you think about a muscle changes length quickly, right? Like if you think about doing jump rope for a second, right? Jump and rope. The primary muscle that's lengthening and shortening is going to be your calves, right? Your gastroc, maybe, gastroc and soleus. If you're doing jump ropes, yeah, using your arms, but it's mostly the calves if you're doing it right. And so what happens? Well, that calf is rapidly stretching. It's rapidly stretching. Well, this muscle spindle, you can think of it, it's a regulator of muscle tension, muscle length. It's also a protective mechanism. It serves a lot of purposes that come up inside the material. But here, what you can take away when the muscle spindle is activated to a greater degree, right? It senses a change in length, and even more so if it senses a fast change in length, then it causes an automatic reflex, which means this doesn't really go to the brain, but we have the muscle spindle sends sensory information back to our spinal cord. And then this automatic reflex arc from the spinal cord to our muscle tells it to contract. And this is actually part of what we call the stretch reflex. When we have this rapid stretch, we also have a rapid contraction. And that comes into play not only in the flexibility chapter, because you guys will find that muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs and our nervous system, they are regulating our positions. They do play a role in how much range of motion our body gives us in a specific exercise or movement. But they also come up again in plyometrics, because as we have this stretch shortening cycle or the stretch reflex, it's also performance benefit, right? If I get this rapid stretch followed by the rapid contraction, it uses the elastic elements of our tendons and our ligaments. So there's a lot going on here, but at least in regards to like when you're going through chapter 5, what do you need to know? Well, you need to know where the muscle spindle is. It's in the belly of the muscle, and you need to know what it does. It senses change in length of the muscle and how fast it's changing length. All right. So as you guys are watching that, if you're watching in real time or after the fact, throw me any questions you got about this, because I know this is one that like comes back up in the material. I'm going to try not to go too deep on it though, because I'm going to keep it more chapter 5 relevant. And when you think about it, so keep this in mind as we move on to Golgi tendon organs. With the muscle spindle, we got change in length and the rate of change. So it's like, how long is my muscle and how quickly is it changing positions? Now, the next one, the Golgi tendon organ, gives us tension, force. Where does it live? Guys, it's in the name. Golgi tendon organ. Don't mess that one up. Golgi tendon, it's in the tendon. So like, right, you think muscles connecting, that white tissue you see here in the image. And it's going to be sensitive to how much tension and also how fast is that tension developing. So when you think about that, we have one that gives us in the belly of the muscle position. The other one is sensing force and tension. Together, they work to give us a pretty clear picture of like, what is going on with my body? Where are my joints? Now, what you got to know about the Golgi tendon organ is it does the opposite. If the Golgi tendon organ senses a lot of tension, it will actually go essentially like kind of down regulate muscle contraction in that same area. So if we're sensing, if we've got GTO activation in the bicep or that bicep tendon, it's going to down regulate or essentially like go and try to block some of the muscle contraction going to the bicep. So they do opposite things. Muscle spindle creates contraction in that same muscle. Golgi tendon organ tries to relax that muscle fiber or that muscle group. Okay, cool. So hopefully that's helpful for you guys. Once again, as you guys get into flexibility, this makes a lot more sense because, man, these things are kind of regulating your position, partially because your nervous system is smart. It just wants you to survive. It doesn't care if you're flexible. So sometimes it's not going to give you stuff. And if you're smart, you can figure out how to override some of that on the nervous system as well. All right. But muscle spindles, GTOs, got to know those guys. Got to know those. No question. And then this one here, this is more for you guys. I like this slide, just to give you guys a good visual. Let me see if I can, boom, get rid of this for a few. This is just to help you visualize. Now, the book doesn't go super deep on the stages of motor learning, but I already kind of mentioned it with exercises. Exercises are skills, right? If you can think about, let me think for a second. Okay, so my girls, I have 6 and 7-year-old daughters. They're amazing. They're so funny. But right now we're kind of getting into basketball, which is a ton of fun for me because I played a lot of basketball growing up. And I can remember like learning how to shoot free throws and how to like my shooting form. And like right now they're working on the same stuff, right? We can get the ball up to the hoop. It's not consistent. That's fine. So early on, like right now, as they're learning that skill, it takes a lot of like cognitive power. They have to be really, really conscious. I have to give a lot of feedback, set them up in positions. Like that's where they're at with it. For me, same thing. You think about it, like, let's say somebody's learning how to squat. Seems pretty simple to us, but if they're not really well-versed in exercise or they're not great movers, they don't pick things up easily. It does take a lot of like going slow, stabilization, going slow, taking your time, not worrying about loads, giving them feedback, and then just giving them practice to get better. Kind of like the free throw, just looks a little bit less complicated, but it's the same thing. Associative is like they start to already make some of their own corrections. Like they might do a set of squats, but they know like, that was wrong. Let me move my feet. My feet were in the right position. So they're not just relying upon you now. Now they're able to make some connections. Same with my girls. Now they kind of know like, oh yeah, crap, I had my hands in the wrong spot on the ball. And then autonomous is, they're much further along. They make automatic changes in the moment. They don't need a lot of feedback around it. So just think about this. You don't have to go deep on this, but know that when someone is exercising and they're learning how to do push-ups, how to do rows, how to do overhead presses, squats, lunges, RDLs, whatever it is. They're going through this process. And if they're a newer exerciser, it just gives you more reason to like be patient. Don't worry so much about the loads. Focus on crushing technique in the first 2 to 4 weeks. And then they're going to be ready to load things up better because they'll be in a better place in regards to some of this stuff. All right. So motor learning process, super cool, but maybe a little higher level than we need to go. All right. So let's keep moving through. Let's what we talked about. Nervous system. That's great. And again, there's other stuff in there, guys, but like I'm trying to give you the level you need to focus. Let's talk now about muscles. The muscles, right? Biceps, triceps, pecs, lats. Inside of our masterclass here, we need 2 or 3 hours for me to really go through every muscle. So I'm not going to. Thankfully, if you guys are in our course or you're on our materials, go through, look for Axiom Muscular Anatomy on YouTube. You're going to see a bunch of videos that break down all the muscles you need to know. But guys, there's no doubt you need to have the muscular anatomy memorized. I'm going to give this to you for a second. Let me change screens so you guys can see, because I'm going to give you like teaching knowledge for a second. When you guys get to your exam, as well as when you are training clients in the real world, there's going to be practical application. Now, practical application means you've got to be able to apply what you know in the moment with this new scenario. Now, there's a lot of educational research on this and like learning of different levels. I don't love memorization just for memorization's sake. However, when you're trying to process things at a higher level, you need some things to just be operating in the background, right? Like you're like a computer system. You just need some things to operate in the background while you're doing this new task. So muscular anatomy is one of those. It's one of those. And I know it's going to take a little while. You're going to watch the videos we've got. You're going to download the anatomy guide. And even that, then you're going to have to like obsess about it when you're in the gym, right? You're doing an exercise. What muscle are you working? Where does it start? Where does it end? Right? You got to be thinking about these things because your end goal is to be able to look at yourself in the mirror, right? Close on, close off, whatever, and to be able to visualize the muscles. And the good thing is you don't need to know anatomical origins and insertions, but you do need to know biceps brachii, right? I need to know the anatomical term. I need to know pectoralis major. I need to know gastroc, soleus, anterior tibialis, rectus femoris, all my vastus muscles, semitendinosus, semimembranosus. So the details you got to know. And if you're not sure what muscles you need to know and you haven't watched those videos, go back, watch our muscular anatomy videos because I go through all the muscles you need to know for the exam. And also, in my opinion, those are the muscles you need to know as a trainer because we need to know what muscles that we're overloading. It helps you understand positions. So I'm not going to go deep on that because that would take way too much time. But I can tell you, yes, even though it's not really in the material, it's not presented in a lot of detail, the expectation is that you know that. Like you need to have that muscular anatomy mastered. So reach out if you guys need some help with that. But either way, we do have some different types of muscle. And we have skeletal muscle, which all of us are probably most familiar with. We also have cardiac and smooth. And all three of these do function differently, right? We'll get to in chapter 7, the length tension relationship. That's mostly, oh, there we go. Come on, guys. This is, I always got to know that my brother from another mother, David Crump, my business partner with Axiom, is just like lurking in the background just to give you guys the right links. My man. So if you guys haven't watched this stuff, check it out. Check it out. That's going to be helpful. But beyond that, we have skeletal muscle. Then we have cardiac. We have smooth. Real takeaway is they all three function differently. You think cardiac and smooth muscle. We're not thinking about those things. We're not trying to have those muscles contract. They just do. And they do have some different, components. But we don't need to go crazy deep on that. So either way, what do muscles do? They move the bones, baby, right? The bones, the skeletal system, which I'm not going to talk a lot about in this, truthfully, in this call. They're a lever system. And guess what? Muscles pull on those. And that's what kind of, brings everything together, generating forces. That's the main thing we need to know about muscles. All right. So that's the bigger picture. You got to know your muscular anatomy. We probably got some work to do on that. Like I mentioned, obsess about it in the gym. If you work out tomorrow and you're not thinking about, damn it, what muscle am I working? Where does it start? Where does it end? Is this eccentric? Is it concentric? You're missing out, right? You're missing out if you want to get to the next level. Beyond that, though, a couple of things we do need to know is, not only because this one comes up on the exam, but it does give us a little insight into what's happening actually deeper down when we look more, micro rather than macro at the muscle fibers, is understanding that we have what's called a sarcomere. This is like the functional unit of our muscles and muscle fibers. And what a sarcomere is this is really where the actin and the myosin interact, right? These repeating sections of actin and myosin. And I'm sure if you guys have gone through the material, right, actin and myosin, these are what we call myofilaments. Essentially, if we look at the microscopic level, this is actually where muscle contraction is occurring. This is where what they call sliding filament theory is occurring. And some of you guys have, especially if you are students, you guys have seen me do my childlike, hey, like actin and myosin sliding over each other. But it's literally what's happening. It's what's happening. And that's kind of the level you guys need to know. But this is an important area because one thing, if you think about like the quadriceps, like a muscle group. It's a pretty long muscle, right, in our body. And it would be disadvantageous if that quad was like one long string, right? Because guess what? If like one area in that long string gets damaged or snapped or strained or whatever, the whole thing is kind of shot, right? Versus we have these like smaller, like muscle fibers are a little shorter and they stack together in these sarcomeres to create the full length of the muscle. It makes it more resilient, right? I mean, we may have damage in one area. So just one thing to think about. But either way, test-wise, sarcomere, kind of the functional unit of our muscles. And it's this interaction where the repeating sections of actin and myosin inside the body. All right. So again, keep it at that level. You could go way deeper. There's great videos out there. Actually, even another channel called Crash Course, which is like a kid's educational channel. I'm like a child. They do a great job with videos. So again, if you want to go real deep, there's stuff out there, but that's probably the level you guys need to stay. And then here's a simpler one for you guys. Let's go with stuff you guys probably know. Just understanding what's the difference between the different muscle fiber types. And I'll be honest, guys, especially at this stage, you can stay mostly focused on what's the difference between type 1 and type 2. You don't need to get super deep on type 2A, type 2X. There's actually a lot of different muscle fiber types when you get into the research on here, but it's more type 1 muscle fibers are slightly more aerobic, slightly more oxidative as you get into your chapter 8 stuff. They have more capillaries, more mitochondria. This is great for aerobic metabolism. Now, because of that, right, they get increased oxygen delivery, but they tend to be smaller in size. I mean, sure, you guys have probably seen that picture of like the marathon runner next to the sprinter. And that's kind of unfair, but that's the idea, is that your type 1 fibers, your more endurance-based fibers, they're not going to be as large because they don't need the glycogen stores that your type 2 fibers need. So they're slower to fatigue, but they also don't produce as much force. And then type 2 muscle fibers, right, they're going to rely more upon anaerobic metabolism, which means they're going to have fewer capillaries, fewer mitochondria. They don't need as much of those aerobic energy producers. They are larger in size. They produce more force, but they fatigue faster. So type 1, type 2, based on how you train, you can make someone more like one or the other, but you can't really cross them over. You're not going to change a type 1 to a type 2 in adults, at least as far as we know in the research yet. All right. Other thing to remind here too, guys, as we start thinking about like, how does this relate to training, maybe clients, especially training clients over the age of 40, type 2 muscle fibers, they cost a lot of energy, right? And when it comes to, life cycle, a lot of people are going to lose those type 2 muscle fibers faster than type 1. And some of that's just like, if you think about our body and survival, if your body doesn't feel like it needs these fast twitch fibers, right? If you're not doing fast twitch training, you stop playing sports in your 20s, you're not doing any power work into your 30s. By the time you're in your 40s, you're going to probably have lost more of the type 2 fibers because your body doesn't feel like you need them. You're not giving any stimulus to it. So you do tend to lose more of the type 2, more of that power, because many of us just don't do it. So some stuff to keep in mind as we start thinking about like the life cycle of muscle as well. And that's kind of what this slide gets into, is like, hey, if all things were considered the same, then generally we reach peak in mass, power, and strength, 20 to 30. You might be thinking, well, Joe, like I know people who are in their 40s and are in the best shape of their lives. Well, that's just behavioral though. That means they probably didn't train. They didn't have time to train in their 20s and 30s. They're working, they had kids, whatever it is. But if we look at it hormonally, for the most part, that's kind of peak for a lot of people. Doesn't mean you can't maintain, but if we're looking at like, where could you do the most, tends to be at that area. And then as we go 30s to 50s and beyond, that's where you see changes in muscle fiber, not only like losses in power with fast twitch fibers, but also just loss in muscle. And sarcopenia sets in for a lot of people. Obviously not the people we work with, because we're going to make sure they're lifting, but this is the reality of what happens for a lot of people, especially if we're not taking the right training approaches and nutritional approaches to support the maintenance of our muscle mass and muscle fibers as we get older. All right, guys. So love that. All right. Deep breath. Chapter 5. Crushed it. We'll see how we can do on chapter 7. We could spend hours on all this stuff. But the thing I like about chapter 7 is it kind of builds on some of the concepts. We already talked about the human movement system. This gives us a nice visual of it. And really chapter 7 gets a little further into like the forces, the biomechanics behind some of the stuff that we've already been talking about. So I'm going to keep moving and diving in. Another concept that, it's easy to spend a lot of time on the terminology. proximal, distal, medial, lateral, anterior, posterior, I think you're probably thinking, Joe, like, am I going to ever use this stuff with clients? And chances are like, maybe not, it's kind of the language. I look at it when you're jumping into fitness and training, you want to take this serious. It's kind of like the underlying language of your profession. And so, honestly, with a little effort, it's not hard to learn. It's not hard to learn. There's a little bit of memorization, a little bit of practice in front of the mirror. But is this going to be a huge test thing for you guys? Probably not, right? Some of the anatomical terminology. But I do think when you start thinking about movements like flexion, extension, joint actions, knowing like how to come back to anatomical position, and being familiar with this stuff. So this is another one. Thankfully, guys, we've got some great YouTube videos on. So if you're like, crap, I don't know this stuff, Joe, can you teach me? Go check it out, right? Anatomical terminology, Axiom Fitness Academy on YouTube. That video is going to show up or whatever. We'll throw that link to the video in the notes after all this is done as well. So go check that out because stuff's pretty easy to learn. I'm going to keep us moving through. Planes of motion, same thing. This is one that for some reason does trick a lot of people as you're getting started. But it's really just the idea that like, hey, guess what? The body was meant to move in different ways. And if we wanted to get real specific about it, there's almost infinite planes of motion. In general, we talk about sagittal, which you can think about front to back. If I'm doing front raises, I'm doing bicep curls, most flexion and extension happens in that sagittal plane, front to back exercises. Then you have, the frontal plane, which would be like lateral raises, lateral lunges, side planks, a single side suitcase carry. Those are all frontal plane focused movements. And then you have transverse, which is rotation. We have rotation in a handful of areas of our body. We got rotation in our hips, rotation in our spine, some in our shoulders. And the idea is that a lot of our day-to-day movements are combinations of these planes of motion. And so you don't need to be so obsessed when you start training people on like, oh crap, I got to do 2 sagittal exercises and I got to do 2 frontal and I got to do 2 transverse. I don't think it needs to be quite that even. A lot of people will be stable and be able to train with some intensity with more sagittal stable moves. But for me, getting people moving side to side, getting them rotating in the warm-ups with your accessory moves, it's probably only going to improve how they perform in life and the gym. That's the real takeaway. That's the real takeaway on those things. But beyond that, again, it's not a crazy, heavy exam focus. I think it's more the application. How do I apply that? And I think if you take that in mind where it's like, let me find areas to put in and integrate over time, more frontal and transverse, it's going to be helpful. But don't jump into too much, right? Because too much of a good thing can be a bad thing, especially for newer exercisers. And then here's another one where, again, we've got some great content out there on already, but just understanding muscle contractions. I think inherently we know that there's different muscle contractions, but not a lot of people focus on it with their training, right? Their training. So as we break down some of the terminology, isotonic, right, really encompasses eccentric and concentric. And so as you can see in the definition here in table 2, right, forces produce, muscle tension is developed, and movement occurs. So we're moving through a range of motion. And so eccentric contractions, right, that's when we have the muscles essentially are lengthening under tension. So if I'm doing a bicep curl and I'm at the top and I'm lowering that weight down, my biceps brachii is lengthening under tension. That's going to be eccentric. Then we have concentric, which is muscle shortening, right, lifting that weight back up. And then the third that we'll see here, isometric. All right, so we kind of know all three that we have them, but I think if you want to be next level with a lot of this stuff, is thinking about like, how do I use it and when or does it matter? When or does it matter? And that's the real takeaway. So first off, a couple quick facts here. Eccentric contractions, you are the strongest in. Generally like 20 to 40% stronger in your eccentric contractions than your concentric. And that's a good thing. If you think about it, I call that like your braking force, like being able to stop your body. So it's good that we're eccentrically strong. Sometimes you can take advantage of that. Maybe some of you guys have done like pull-up negatives because you're trying to get stronger with pull-ups. So that will be taking advantage of the fact that we are stronger eccentrically. Now, early on with exercisers and our stabilization, it's one of the reasons we also slow things down. So we slow things down on the eccentric, not because we're trying to make them harder, but partially back to that motor learning. We're trying to give our body time to understand what's going on. Slowing down that eccentric tries to keep us in better positions. Sometimes if you go too fast in the eccentric, momentum takes over. So that's one of those ideas. All right. And over time, we'll get, we can get much stronger that way, but slower eccentrics to start, normal concentrics. A lot of people focus only on the concentric, and it is an important part, right? It's all three play important roles, but based on where I'm at in my training phases, I might focus on one more than the other. Like someone's just starting out, you know what? I'm going to go a little slower on the eccentrics. I might have some paused isometrics at the bottom position and then normal concentric. That's going to be different than when they're in the strength and power. In strength and power, my primary focus is going to be concentric contraction. And I'm a little bit less worried about the others. So it's just knowing which of those am I focused on and why. And just keep in mind that we have all three. And as a coach and trainer, you're dictating, what am I focusing on? How fast should I be moving eccentrically, concentrically, and should there be an isometric? Those are all within our coaching and our control. All right. Another concept that comes up, and this really kind of goes back to you guys mastering muscular anatomy. Like just, you can spout it off. You can see a body, you know what muscles there, is just knowing, like, when I do an exercise, what am I working? Right? If I'm doing lunges, what are the primary movers in a lunge? You guys can think about that for a second. If I'm doing a lunge variation, what are the primary muscles? Glutes and quads, right? Glutes and quads. You might be thinking, well, Joe, what about the hamstrings? Hamstrings might be more of a synergistic muscle, right? Inside of squatting and lunging, based on what kind of lunge or squat I'm doing. So agonist is going to be, what are the primary muscles that are creating the joint motion, right? The big movers. Antagonists would be what could be working in opposition. So for example, if I'm doing a bicep curl, my triceps could be the antagonist. For some exercises like squats and lunges, it's not always so obvious what the antagonist is because of the role the hamstrings play, but that's the idea. Synergistic, what helps? So think about what muscles, they might not be doing most of the movement, but they're helping. So even in something like a dumbbell row, right? If I'm doing a bent over dumbbell row, hopefully my lats are the prime mover. And hopefully my biceps brachii and maybe even my brachioradialis, my forearm muscle, hopefully those are synergistic. But those are the things we're thinking about. And then stabilizers. What are all the other muscles that are stabilizing and trying to prevent movement everywhere else? So that's another one. Once you've mastered muscular anatomy and you're thinking about it while you're working out, now you go to the next level and think about, all right, what are the prime movers? What might be the antagonist here? What are some synergistic muscles? You got to really think through these scenarios if you want to not just do well for the exam, but do well on the training floor, because I know as you guys are going through the material, some of that stuff's just not in there. Okay. Last couple concepts, guys, we're crushing it here, trying to stay on track with our hour limit for you guys, and we're getting there. Another one inside of chapter 7, length tension relationship. I'm not going to go real deep on this one because this one can be confusing if we try to, but it's just the idea that somewhere mid-range of motion for a muscle, let's just use the arms because you guys can see the bicep here. Somewhere mid-range of motion, not all the way flexed, not all the way lengthened, somewhere right in between, I've got the optimal overlap of my actin and myosin, right? Going back to the inside the muscle fiber. So I have the most overlap between the actin and myosin, and that allows me to generate the most tension, the most force. So there is kind of this natural spot in our range of motion of the muscles where we're generally able to create the most force. And so what do I do with that? Well, I think some of it is just understand why people are stronger in certain positions. Even one to think about, you go to the average gym and, you see somebody doing some back squats and you're like, man, that person's not going very deep, right? They're not, a lot of people don't go super deep. Well, I mean, again, think about like a quarter squat. That's kind of mid-range of motion for your glutes and quads. So like naturally your body knows like, hey, you're strong here, but if you go deeper, I don't know if you can do it. So for a lot of people, that might be why, like, hey, they're limited of going deeper, even if they had lighter weights, like it's just not as natural for them. So that's maybe one practical takeaway of it. The other thing is just knowing that, like, hey, full range of motion. If I get the bottom of a squat, I'm not going to be able to generate as much force if I'm fully lengthened in my glutes, fully lengthened in my quads compared to a quarter squat. So I'm going to have to adjust my expectations, adjust the weight. So real takeaway is just knowing mid-range of motion for a muscle, generally we can generate the most force. And that has to do with this length tension relationship. Essentially, it's how the muscles are designed. All right, cool. Let's move it on through. This one, guys, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on because this is kind of truthfully the addition of the muscular systems, these subsystems in the NASM material. This is newer with the 7th edition. It wasn't in previous editions. I've been teaching NASM for a while. It's a little higher level way of thinking. Of just like, hey, there's these other muscles, these muscle groups throughout the body that really, they function together for these higher level tasks. And so takeaway, like local muscular system, this one comes up again in your core chapter. So like memorization of these muscles will be easier, but it's the idea that like, we've got this inner layer. If you think about the core, we've got the inner unit and the outer unit, or the local and the global. And the local is more like inner unit stability. And so these muscles all kind of co-contract to try to give us stability in the pelvis and the spine, right? That's a major takeaway there. So that we found over time, these muscles work together specifically for that task. That's the idea. Same thing with our posterior oblique muscles, the glutes and the lats. This is one where, especially guys, if you look at like some anatomy charts and you see, you're like, oh yeah, look at that. The lats and the glutes, they kind of just make this like one line, and they very much work together to translate forces across the pelvis. Running, jumping, sprinting, even like swinging a bat, throwing, like these muscles very much work together. Even if you think about like running, right? We're opposite hand, opposite foot creatures. That allows us to create this stretch in that area. So without going super deep, there are some ways we can strategically train this, try to get these muscles to work together. It's just another good example of like, hey, we can train the glutes. Hey, we can train the lats. And oftentimes we will train them separately. For some people, there might be a benefit of training them together, because they actually do function together when we're out in the real world doing other things. That's the idea, I think, behind the subsystems. I do think it's going to take you a little while to figure out how to apply that stuff, but just knowing that it's there is the first step. Same thing for the anterior oblique. It's more about how these parts of the body connect. You know, you got your adductors on one side, obliques on the other, you know, especially with throwing and rotation. And then last one here, which is, again, one of my, I call it fan favorite, one of my favorites, because I find this is lacking for a lot of people. This is learning how to control movement in the frontal plane, the lateral subsystem, right? Glute medius and adductors on one side with the QL on the opposite. And I also just think about this as like your side body, you know, so easy thing for me, lateral plank variations, throw some people there. I find for a lot of people, if you can get people a little stronger with like lateral plank variations and versions, single side suitcase carries, that can do a lot for helping them learn how to control the frontal plane. And I'm not saying it's going to fix everyone's back pain, but getting them stronger there sure isn't going to hurt it either. You know, a lot of people are weak. If they can't hold a lateral plank up for 20 or 30 seconds, I'm focusing on making that stronger, because I know that's only going to help them connect everything better down the road. So we can have a whole masterclass just on those. I'm going to move through. And I think this is like our last major concept. Bam. Yes. Last major concept in chapter 7, guys. We've done it. We're almost there. Is lever systems. And don't go crazy deep. A lot of people are like, Joe, I'm so confused on the lever systems. And I'm like, you know what? As long as you know, like class 1, class 2, class 3, that's probably it for now. Now, application of lever systems really is what we call biomechanics, understanding forces of the body. That will make you a higher level trainer, right? When you really master some of these concepts, how if I put the body here, if I put the weight here, that is, you know, our application of torque and forces, but that might take a while. That's okay. Anyways, main thing to know, there's very few first and second class levers. The seesaw, really, only example is our head and the way the muscles attach there. Second class lever, super efficient, like a wheelbarrow. One of the reasons we're so strong with our calves, the ankle, right? That's a second class lever. Most of our joints, especially as we look at the exercises we're doing in the gym, most of them we're dealing with third class levers. Not super efficient, which actually means they're easy to overload, because, you know, our muscles attach very close to the joint, but we end up loading the body much further away. So it means strength training is a very easy way to get people stronger based on that joint setup. All right. So, but beyond that, guys, don't go too crazy deep. I love the physics stuff. It's one of my favorites. But as far as where you are right now, that is probably the level that you guys need. Bam, guys, chapter 5 and 7. I know you might be like, Joe, there's some other things you didn't talk about. That's on purpose. Stay focused on the things that I did, review some of those. And, you know, one thing I like to talk about, guys, just work the process. I believe, regardless of what other people say on, you know, YouTube and otherwise, and you guys all know there's characters out there, you know, slinging different stuff, running different courses, doing whatever, and they might talk trash on whoever. It's not my style. I believe NASM, I believe these organizations, they want you to pass. Does that make it easy? No. Do they see it as their job to teach you? No, that's your job. And that's my job, right? That's what we're doing here. So try to take some of the stuff we talked about, think about it, really think about, how do I bring this to life in the gym? And then also, you know, use your practice exams, use these quizzes, fill in the gaps. And that's hopefully going to keep you guys at the right level. And yeah, I can't stress it enough. The more you can be processing some of this when you're in the gym, thinking about it. And honestly, even if you have people in your life, like, take a shot at explaining some of this stuff to them. Just the process of having to work through some of these concepts in your own words are going to get you to the next level. But I think if you felt pretty good with what we went through today, I think you're okay. Move on from this stuff. Like, get on to some other things, because there's way too much stuff you guys need to do in order to get past it. You know, and I like to remind you guys, hey, if this process was easy, everybody be doing it, right? All 80,000 people who sign up with the, you know, organizations, they'd all pass. but it's not what's happening. And that's what's going to differentiate you guys. You were on this webinar. That alone makes me know, hey, it's a Friday. It's almost 3 p.m. now for me Eastern. You guys want this. So keep putting in that work. I will say here, guys, if you guys have any questions, I'll tackle some, right? The other thing I want to throw out there before some of you guys disappear on me is if you, again, so many of you guys are in our course. You guys are crushing it right now. I hope this was helpful. Some of you guys are in our community. I recognize some of the names on here. Some of you guys have never spoke to before. All right. So this is the first time that you're with me. You're learning from me. You're watching this video on a recording or live or whatever. If you need help, reach out. I mean, obviously, you guys will be able to find our advisor links. If you want to book a call with me, I'm also going to throw it out there. I might regret this. If you're looking for some help, you want to jump on a call, shoot me a text, 518-683-5161. Let me know who you are. Let me know that you're watching this webinar, and we'll see how we can help you out, get you either the right information, a better study strategy. Some people are a great fit for what we do with our courses, but I'm going to help you guys no matter what. So I'm going to give you guys that. And then also, if you guys want to reach out to me, obviously active on these places, axiomfitnessacademy.com, best place to go for all our course info. Also to jump on a strategy call. I'm pretty active on Instagram as well, Coach Joe Drake. You can shoot me an email. So you guys got those. All right, you got those. And what I'll do right here, yeah, boom, my man David already threw a link in here if you guys want to hop onto my schedule, which honestly is the best way because that fills up pretty quick. Hop in there. I will say I saw one question that I'll tackle here before we're done. I'm going to let you guys get out of here. It's Friday. Is Karina. First off, thanks for throwing this in here. Karina said, regarding planes of motion, I'm having the hardest time understanding foot, ankle, pronation, supination, specifically eversion, inversion. I think I understand the motion, but it seems backward to me and I can't remember the names of it. Any tips? Karina, I'm going to give you 2 tips here. I'm going to give you 1 tip, which you may or may not like. 1 tip is don't stress about that. If you feel like that's holding you up, even if you never looked at that again, I think you could be a great trainer, and I think you might not even see it on the exam. So there's that piece. Otherwise, what might help you as well is go watch a video or 2, just like we're doing now. I think someone explaining, and I already know, hop onto YouTube. I want you to be active with it. Hop on YouTube, understanding inversion versus eversion for the ankle. And I guarantee you there's probably a great physical therapist who's going to walk you through inversion versus eversion for the ankle. So I'm going to tell you that because that's probably going to do better justice. Go in, watch a couple minute video. Okay. That's probably going to click with those things. But beyond that, honestly, it's kind of small potatoes in the grand scheme of things. So I don't mean to downplay your question, but I want you to know how important or now, not important that it is. But guys, beyond that, hey, I appreciate you guys sticking with me. If you are watching this after the fact, don't hesitate to reach out, leave some comments on here. But I hope you guys have a great rest of your Friday. And actually, before I go, you guys are here. Tell me, was this helpful? Was it helpful to go through this content together? Because your guys' opinions, your feedback on this stuff massively dictates what we do in the future. So if you want more stuff like this, throw it in the comments. Let me know. And if it was helpful, also just let me know what part of it. Is it helpful just to have me go through and break things down? Is it helpful to have some questions, some answers? Descriptions, scenarios, run through slides, give me some detail, baby. Give me some detail because that stuff definitely has a big impact on what we do in the future. But either way, guys, I believe that people out there need you in their life. So damn it, it is your responsibility. It's our responsibility to get you to the other side because if we can get you training people, the world is going to be healthier. People are going to be happier. And I want this to be something that helps you guys grow. So I mentioned it before. If I can help you, please reach out. Have a great weekend. I'm going to see you guys soon.